Hi, my name is Gabrielle Clark, and I am here to present my presentation on my final project, and my title is Measuring the Effectiveness of an In-Class Flip with Phonics Instruction in a Third Grade Class. Introduction to the problem. So in today's society, teachers are expected to teach students how to leverage technology. They are also expected to foster and create learning environments that promote student self-direction, where students are taking charge of their learning and self-pacing. So in a way, the role of the teacher has evolved from maybe a lecturer to more of a facilitator. So there is a need for research to discover how blended learning and flipped learning, since we are expected to leverage technology, impacts student learning and motivation. So the purpose of the study is to measure the effectiveness of in-class flipped phonics instruction in regards to student motivation. The study also explores other factors involved in student motivation, and it looks for impacts involved with flipped phonics instruction. So my research question. Does in-class flipped phonics instruction increase student motivation with Mrs. Clark's third grade students during the spring of 2018? And if you look on the screen, you can see my variables. So my independent variable was the use of in-class flipped instruction. Dependent variable was student motivation. And here's my hypothesis. The use of in-class flipped phonics instruction will increase student motivation in this third grade class during the spring of 2018. And of course, the alternative hypothesis is the opposite. So the use of in-class flipped phonics instruction will not increase student motivation in this third grade class during the spring of 2018. Now, it is very important to look at the literature. So what is flipped learning? Well, according to the literature, flipped learning is a model that uses classroom time for activities that involve critical thinking, application, and collaboration. So in a way, they flip the typical style of learning. So the content is actually delivered at home through videos or podcasts, and then class time is used for the application activity. So flipped learning is known to create student-centered classrooms for 21st century teaching. Now, there are some different models of flipped learning, and I'm just going to talk about two, but there actually are many more out there. The one that I was just talking about is the traditional flip. So that is where the students are exposed to the content at home, and then they come to school and they apply their skills through practice and collaboration activities. There is also something called the in-class flip, which is important because that's what I was looking at through my study, and this is exactly what it says. The students do the flip in the classroom. So they watch the video or listen to the podcast inside the classroom, and then the teacher uses that time to either pull small groups or meet with individual students. Here is a graphic that displays some of the different types of in-class flips. There are so many out there, but this just notes two of them. There's the simple sequence, where students just move through different stations in a logical sequence. The mixed sequence here is one where students actually start at different stations according to their pace and their level of mastery. So if students already have mastered the content from the video, they don't have to watch the flip video. They can just go to the collaboration activities or the practice activities. According to the research, flipped instruction has some impacts that's some patterns that they have found. So there has been a noted heightened student acceptance, so students are accepting flip videos. There's also been an increase in student enthusiasm. This one was really interesting to me because this was conducted with fourth grade students. There was also an increase in student motivation with sixth grade students. And then flipped learning and flipped instruction is known to create student-centered environments because students are at charge of their learning and they are applying their skills through collaboration activities. Now, what is motivation? Because I am looking at student motivation. So motivation is having a strong reason to act. Students tend to be more engaged when they are motivated. So giving students choice and control heightens student motivation. So what I wanted to look at was could flipped learning environments, do they provide students with that choice and the control over their learning? And if they do, does that heighten student motivation? So my methodology here. This is a practical action research project, and this was conducted with 23 students in my 3rd grade classroom, and this was a proposive sample. So my instrumentation and my procedures. So I used 2 different data collection pieces here. I used a lesson rating scorecard, and I also used pre and post test surveys. The lesson rating scorecard was administered at the end of every lesson, and it simply had 2 questions on it. It asked students how they felt about the lesson and how they felt about mastery of the content. And then I gave a pre-assessment at the end of the first 4 weeks of traditional instruction, and then I gave a post-assessment after 4 weeks of flipped instruction. So basically what that looked like was I taught phonics through the traditional method, whole group, for 4 weeks, gave the pre-assessment, and then I taught phonics through flipped learning in a flipped environment for another 4 weeks and gave the post-assessment to see what trends arose in student feelings and student motivation. You can check out all of my files here. So as you can see here, you can see that I created flipped videos. You can see that I created Nearpod quizzes, so formative assessments to go along with the flip videos. I also created my instrumentation here in my data collection. I created Google Form surveys. I created these lesson rating scorecards. So if you would like to check out any of these links here, you can actually click on the links and you can see some of my project files. I was going to just show you one. Here is the lesson rating scorecard. If you go here, you can see that this is what they had to fill out at the end of every single lesson there. So my results. According to the lesson rating scorecards that I just showed you, there was an increase in student positive feelings towards phonics lessons. And you can see this over here. The positive feelings come from the blue, that's the smiley face. And then the middle here, the option 2, that's kind of like the neutral face, or they could select the sad face. So for traditional phonics, it jumped from 63 going to flipped phonics instruction and went all the way to 82%. So there was an increase in student positive feelings. There is also an increase in student thoughts about their mastery of learning targets from traditional to flipped. So students were asked with a thumbs up, thumbs down, how they felt about the targets, and there was a jump from 86 to 98% about how they felt in their confidence levels. In addition, you can see here that from the pre and the post survey, so these were the pre and the post assessments, there was a similar increase in student positive feelings toward flipped phonics versus traditional. So if you look here, you can see that there was a measure here that said select the smiley face describing how you feel in class when learning phonics in front of the classroom, so that's the pre, and then how you feel about in the class when watching flip videos, that would be the post. So as you can see, there is an increase here from that 47.8 to the 62.5. And you can also see that there is a decrease in negative thoughts. It went from 21 to 0% here. And that does make sense since the positive thoughts are going up. So that was a similar finding that I found on the assessments here, the pre and the post, as I did find on the lesson rating scorecards as well. In addition, I also found this was an interesting impact about student ownership. So there was an item that asked about how students felt about feeling in charge of their learning. And there was an increase by 28%. So with traditional instruction, 68% of my kids felt in charge of their learning according to that measure on the assessment. And that jumped all the way to 96% of my students defining feeling in charge of their learning. So that was a really big jump there. Another thing that I put on the post assessment is I had an open response item that kind of just asked how they felt about flipped learning. And one pattern that came up was that many students noted that they enjoyed being able to self-pace and go at their own pace and not have to go at the same pace as their peers, and being able to go back and rewatch videos if they were confused. So that is something to take into consideration as well. And those findings were found through a narrative format, an open response item. This was huge. 71% of my students expressed preference in using flip videos for phonics instruction over the traditional delivery. So 71% of my kids said I would rather use flip videos over the traditional method. So my conclusions here. There was an increase in student motivation when comparing traditional to in-class phonics instruction. There was also an increase in student ownership and empowerment in students feeling in charge of their learning when looking at traditional to in-class. And then there was a huge preference of students preferring flipped videos over the traditional delivery. So my recommendations. I would like to continue in-class flip phonics with students in the upcoming school year and see if I observe similar trends. I would also like to create more flip videos to differentiate in my classroom, because that is one thing I learned, that those videos can really help me to differentiate, meet the needs of my kids, because I can assign different videos to different students. I do think that future research is needed to investigate the relationship between flipped learning and student achievement, because I did not look at student achievement. I just looked at student motivation and how they felt about their learning. I also think future research is needed to look at the differences in student motivation with in-class versus traditional flipped. So the in-class flipped versus the traditional flipped. And then I'm also curious, and I think there needs to be future research in the use of teacher time within the flipped environment and that impact. There certainly were some limitations. This cannot be generalized because this was only done as an action research project inside of my classroom with 23 students. There certainly could be some possibility of data collector bias because I was the researcher and I did this in my classroom. This was conducted at the end of the school year, and sometimes student motivation and student engagement is a little bit tricky at the end of the year, so that's a limitation. I have many students who read at different reading levels, and this was a phonics project here, or study here, so that could have impacted that. That's a limitation. And also, there were different amounts of exposure to flip videos. Some of my students had a lot of exposure in different grade levels, and some did not. If you would like to look at my resources, you can click these links. And then you also can find all of my resources here if you want to find out more information about this study and the literature that supports the study. Thanks for listening. You can check out my portfolio here, and you can email me here with any questions. Thanks.